in unconscious aversion to something that they consider disagreeable or weird or merely foolish. And the second answer is related to the first, and also related to what you're seeing, which is a printed edition of the text, and it has to do with scholarship. Scholarship turns out to play a role in toleration. Scholars set to work on what they took to be a poem. The philosopher Gassendi in France had a student translate Lucretius. His student happened to be Molière, the great playwright. Unfortunately, the translation is lost. There was an Italian translation which the Catholic authorities, the church authorities, kept out of print, circulated privately. And in England, first there was a translation of a. Don't know really. What we know is that several of Lucretius's most sophisticated contemporaries were astonished by the power of his poem. Cicero himself, as I say, had no patience with Epicureanism, but thought the poem was remarkable and thought it was astonishing in combining poetry with science. And then Ovid and Virgil. Those, if you're going to choose three people to have work, that's not bad. So we know at least those three people, but beyond that, we know very little about what we think is the case. Stephen Greenberg. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Victor Bailey and the Hall Center. Thank you, David Bergeron, for that wonderful and generous introduction in which you didn't puncture too much on into the strange state of suspended animation, of living death, that is the fate of cultural relics. And it's this peculiar fate that will be the topic of my talk tonight. As I say, I'm living this year in Rome, which is the world's largest archaeological site, in some sense the world's largest graveyard. And it is a place in which the dead are in a strange state of suspended animation. To its monotheism and its universalism, and its precisely choice, and the attendant idea that there might be multiple competing positions among which one might choose, in the manner of the Midrash or of the competing Greek philosophical schools, that theological absolutism decisively rejected. In its place was the single truth, and with it, a determination to weed out all false beliefs. I say again, of course, there wasn't a single truth. Christians weren't fools. They understood they were competing truths. Very existence calls into question, as the servant's question suggests, calls into question the goodness of the seed that the master claims to have sowed, and also threatens to crowd out the life-sustaining crop. But the master explicitly tells his servants not to pull out the weeds, for fear of destroying the wheat. The argument then would seem akin to Milton's argument in the Areopagitica, famous argument for the freedom of the press. But that's not at all Augustine's conclusion. In an influential interpretive move, a crucial move of the kind that intellectuals are extremely good at. That's what we're trained to do. In a key move, he argues against what seems to be the surface interpretation of Jesus' words. He argues that the present Christianity has been by far the most intolerant. Such a summary judgment does not describe the present and cannot possibly describe the day-to-day behavior of medieval and Renaissance Christians either. A mass of historical scholarship has documented the practical accommodations that men and women routinely made to confessional differences within their communities and even their families. These differences could on occasion erupt into violent conflict, and they did erupt into violent conflict from time to time, but for the most part they simmered quietly in an uneasy convivencia. But the principle, at least, was clear. Heresy was classified as a capital crime, a serious crime. With philosophical skepticism, the widespread popular revulsion in the wake of religious wars, and the determination of secular rulers to achieve a pragmatic solution to recurrent sources of public disorder and violence, and growing feeling after a series of catastrophic experiences of enough already. But the issues were by no means quickly or decisively resolved. John Locke's celebrated letter concerning toleration, first published anonymously in Latin in the Netherlands in 1689, declared flatly that the care, therefore, of every man's soul belongs unto himself, and is to be left to himself. But even here, at what must by any reckoning be the extreme outer end of the English Renaissance, 1689, could not be compelled, and descent from one religion or another should not be punished. For all the life and power of true religion consists in the inward and full persuasion of the mind, and faith is not faith without believing. The church, therefore, Locke wrote, must be a free and voluntary society. I may grow rich by an art that I take not delight in. I may be cured of some disease by remedies that I have not faith in. But even in thought, ipso opinione sublata, only in opinion. Here at the very end of the English Renaissance, we find in the work of one of its most daring and enlightened figures a clear limit to what can be tolerated. It's a limit that strikingly echoes a position articulated more than 150 years earlier, at the very beginning of the English Renaissance, by another daring and enlightened figure, Thomas More. Eutropius, the founder of the Commonwealth that bears his name, the rewards and punishments in a universe governed by divine providence. Anyone who fails this belief test will be treated as subhuman and will therefore be enslaved or killed. Why? Because More has an answer. Who can doubt that he'll strive either to evade by craft the public laws of his country or to break them by violence in order to serve his private desires, when he has nothing to fear but laws and no hope beyond the body? Who departed from rabbinical tradition as Hebrew word still for a non-believer, an atheist, is apikoros, an Epicurean. And the church father Lactantius put the condemnation still more severely. Epicurus utterly destroys religion, Lactantius wrote. All of the works of Democritus and Leucippus have vanished, and apart from 3 letters quoted by an ancient historian of philosophy, but also that nothing else existed. No other forms of being, and thus no immaterial demons, no angels, no ghosts, and no bodiless immortal souls. What followed was a succession of unacceptable propositions of the kind that gave Thomas More and John Locke, along with almost all of their Renaissance contemporaries, very bad dreams. And I will just quickly rehearse a few of the propositions that would have been particularly in the world. Nature ceaselessly and randomly experiments. Holy Scripture was understood to mean that all species on the earth were created by God in the first days, over the first 6 days. There are people who still, after all, think this is the case. Mutations were observed, of course, but they were not part of an ongoing, evolving life process, Christians thought. But what this means is that we do not occupy a special privileged place in the order of creation. We're entirely part of the natural world, made of the same stuff that everything else is made of. And our lives can, in effect, be analyzed in the same terms that would be used to analyze all other creatures that forage for food and experience the drive to reproduce their kind. The soul dies. It's to a vain and fruitless struggle for more and more and more. Lucretius was horrified by the urge that people had to keep acquiring more and more and more, never being willing to stop this weird, tremendous desire, which he thought was a part of the catastrophe of the human condition. Now, all
of these propositions would have seemed utterly scandalous to the early 15th century. I probably don't have to tell you that no candidate for office